Very exciting. We got a pretty good mix here of different applications of spatial data. So Neal, who is with Equinox, at Equinox, Neal is leading kind of the implementation of exciting new design technology. I believe your official role is sort of in architecture and real estate for growth and acquisition. You've been becoming this champion of spatial data at Equinox. He's also, I love this factoid about yourself. Outside of Equinox, he's a self-certified techie and data tracker with a firm belief in the future of a quantifiable self. I feel like we need to unpack that later. And then we have, on my left, Jessica, who is working for the City of New York in the Department of Design and Construction. So Jessica is the Chief of Staff to the First Deputy Commissioner at the department, where she is working to transform capital project delivery and provides executive management for a complex capital portfolio. So much larger scale, city scale, which is really exciting. Prior to this, Jessica and I were actually roommates at another point in time at GSAP. And she has a Master of Science in Urban Planning from Columbia. And then a previous career with Boeing and mechanical engineering, right? So you've kind of come a long way across industries. Then we've got Karla over here, who is currently at Knotel doing design technology. She and Neal are actually also partners to integrated projects, which is how we were able to get them here today. And she's working on building information modeling and spatial data. I know you also mentioned VR is something that you're really looking into right now, so that's exciting. So currently you're the head of VDC there, and you have an MR from Pratt. Sorry about that, it's probably announcing rain. And then we've got Violet on the end. She's with Google Sidewalk Labs. A lot of you guys also know her as teaching at Columbia, teaching urban data analytics and tangible computing courses. And she also co-leads the group Architecties, which you should all join. I'll do the plug for you. They put on happy hours and networking events and panels, much more professional than this one, throughout the city if you're really into how architecture and tech can come together. So like I said, very exciting panel. That's all the slides I have, and we'll dive, well, you don't have to see those. We'll dive right in. So before we dive in, let's even the playing field. So we mentioned spatial data is already something that we're understanding at very different scales. So Violet, you're the teacher on this panel. How would you define spatial data for us at a kind of umbrella view?
I feel like spatial data is, it's bad to use the definition of something in the definition, but it's I feel like it's any record or information, so data, that is location, not necessarily location, but I'm trying to use not spatial. X, Y, Z coordinates. It's like it happens somewhere or it has dimension. It has like 3D geometry. So to me, like spatial data could be anything from location data that happens from seamless to the geometry of something. That could be place-based. That could be like this building has dimensions and it happens here. Or that could be I have the geometry of a chair and it happens nowhere, but it's just spatial, it has dimension.
Yeah, so to kind of sum it up, you're saying it's both kind of an urban scale and then down to like, when we talk to Neal, we always say down to the dumbbell, so literally being able to know where anything is anywhere, whether you're zoomed out or you're zoomed all the way in. How do you see spatial data changing the practice of design today? What are the major trends or shifts that we're seeing in the industry? And maybe we'll start with Jessica, all the way zoomed out.
Sure. So just for context, the Department of Design and Construction, we build a lot of the public works for different city agencies. So that's everything from all the streets, sewers, plazas, to libraries, cultural institutions, police precincts. So it's everything underground, the ground, and also buildings. And I would say, like, in terms of the use of spatial data and leveraging the spatial data that exists today, there's definitely a lot more that the city of New York could be doing. I mean, a really good example is just thinking about what's under the ground in New York City. The city owns some stuff, private utilities own things, the MTA has infrastructure, and there's no one consolidated map of all of this underground infrastructure, not only like a line on a map, let alone like in 3 dimensions, which I think is a great opportunity for the city to then leverage that information to be able to design our projects better. Literally what happens now is we say want to put a sewer in a street. Private utilities need to go dig test pits to see where their stuff is because they do not have records of where their infrastructure is. And obviously that leads to really huge project costs and also delays in our projects once we get out to the field. And it's insane that, yes, the city works this way. So I think I've joined the Department of Design and Construction about 1.5 years ago, and in thinking about how to just make our projects take less time, just leveraging data better is one of our biggest strategies. So we have been piloting like some 3D underground areas for certain neighborhoods throughout the city. And then on the building side, we don't own or operate or maintain any of these libraries or cultural institutions. But then those institutions will come to us later on when they want to do a major renovation, for example. So we, when we're starting a project and starting scoping and design, need to start from scratch, trying to figure out, okay, what is the actual condition of this building, or even what are the basic dimensions of this building. So I think, you know, there are so many opportunities to use 3D spatial data of all city assets to be able to just streamline not only the design and construction, but then the operations and maintenance through the full life cycle. And you know, when we're talking about, you know, tens of thousands of assets, when you scale that up, it really could make a huge impact to taxpayers and people in the city.
I'm curious, so when you're working at Sidewalks Labs, how are you guys, like what trends are you guys exploring in the industry with spatial data? Because I think you're both kind of maybe working at similar scales. Prove me, you know, feel free to prove me wrong, or point out that I'm wrong.
I think for us, we're working really at district scale, or at least my team. So there's a number of different teams that work at building scale who are really looking at sensing technology. There are a number of people that are working much more at city scale and how to integrate with infrastructure. But as far as the team that I work on that's working on generative urban design, it's really trying to understand how data integrates with that building level scale, or sorry, district level scale, like a neighborhood or like a master plan district. And so some of the main things we have to think about is thinking a lot more about the outcomes of a district. So I'd say a big trend is not just, I think there's like this kind of fear right now that everyone just wants data and it's this hype around it, but we don't want data for data's sake. We want to understand that we're driving towards a specific outcome. So I think a big trend is like looking at information so that when you're planning something in the very early stages, you know what the ultimate outcome will be. Like right now we don't have anything to close that feedback loop. So without information about how a building is going to perform, it's all speculation. You just like draw something and hope that when you build that, ultimately it will do what you think it will do in the rendering that you make. But like our aim is to understand the outcomes very early on, so like simulate what will happen and see if that is the case by like closing that feedback loop, I guess.
And what do you use as input for those simulations?
It depends a lot on what the simulation is. So Like a daylighting simulation is not so different than probably the ones that you all are used to, where you like simulate the sun path. We have a lot of simulations that are just like cost per square foot or square meter, depending on dimensions and materials, and those kind of have to do with typical costing spreadsheets that you might see from a cost modeler, and everything down to trying to speculate on congestion based on transit and how people might move. And right now that might be just saying as simple as between a transit station and where jobs and homes, we can anticipate occupancy load, and it looks like this might be congested and this might be a vibrant area.
Can you have something? Where did you get your data from?
So it varies really widely.
Okay.
So if we're talking about daylighting simulations, that might be from open data sets on how the sun moves. With a cost modeler, that's usually working directly with someone that does cost modeling. So it's like the knowledge of how much this tends to cost. For transit, we don't actually use data. It's like a kind of understood model of how people move in a generalized way. So like transit modelers, there are like varying degrees of specificity. On an extreme scale, there's like cell phone data that's like place specific. There's like versions of this that are anonymized and not anonymized. We actually don't do any of that. So ours is not specific to like people. So the answer is it's like very disaggregated. It like really depends on the discipline.
I think that's a really interesting question you bring up. So like how do we source our data? And I think both Equinox and Knotel can maybe speak a little bit to what happens when you're having to create your own data sets and mine your own assets to do so.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at it from a completely different scale than both of you, because obviously you scale down from the city to the neighborhood. We're talking about 30, 35,000 square feet of leasable space in a building. So even smaller than the building scale. But what's unique about it is I'm coming from the side of an operator. So what's unique about that is the fact that we have a lot of what I kind of describe as living space. It's space that's been in development for 25 years, as long as we've been around. And these spaces are constantly operating, being upgraded, and there are people flowing in and out every single day. So it lends itself less to more kind of speculation, but more to how we actually utilize spatial data in order to make better informed decisions, one, and to actually fix some of our operational problems. And I guess it would help if I were to step back and just describe a little bit about why that would help. Like broad level, I work within development, but a little bit more specific is I support the real estate acquisition as well as due diligence and planning for new upcoming clubs and lease signings. And part of that role is just understanding exactly what we have as a portfolio. And a big part about having such a wide and old portfolio in the grand scheme of things is understanding how things change over time. And it's very complicated because without utilizing spatial data, there's hardly a record. And you can ask someone, even in our office, what does this look like? How many, you talked about dumbbells. Like, it's funny because we do talk about all the way down to the scale of just a single object in a club. How many of this do we have? Those are things that at scale make a very big difference, especially when you're looking to make new purchases, you're looking at how things change over time, what kind of operating costs you have. So if you go into it blindly, unfortunately, you end up eating a lot of costs, and from an operator's perspective, that's a really big issue. So understanding the portfolio as a whole has been a very big part of my role, and my pivot and what I'm trying to implement now and have been for the last year is what it means to take static data and turn it into live, intelligent data. Because we do have very simple spreadsheets and CAD plans for locations in our portfolio, but unfortunately that is static. And static data is not smart because it doesn't evolve and adapt, because things happen in our locations every day that could warrant changes. So the evolution is, how do we take static data and make it live? And making live data is actually quite useful because you can cross-reference things constantly in order to make high-level decisions. And in a company where you have strong corporate hierarchy and you only have so much time with certain very important people, being able to answer questions quickly is actually more important than actually working on those things for months and months, because you have very limited windows. So to me, the most important thing and the biggest trend that I see from an operator's perspective is, one, if you don't have data, you need it. And two is having data that is actually useful. And for me, that's smart data. So we've actually been collaborating with IP in order to develop a stronger set of smart data, which encapsulates, something as high level as 3D scanning, but also using those point clouds to actually develop architectural digital models. BIM, obviously, you're all training to be architects, so you understand what I mean when I say that. Unfortunately, as a smaller department in a bigger organization, I typically have to describe everything I say because no one gets it.
It's a safe space here.
But it's a safe space. So from BIM, you then extract data, and all of that stays live and it stays intelligent. So we're finding a lot of success in using even just the high-level 3D scanning, but also we're able to then pull down and say, what can this data actually be used for? Because if it's not live, people don't trust it. And I think that that's the biggest key for operators, having real trustworthy data.
Karla, I'm curious to hear from your perspective. So you guys are a company that's growing rapidly, getting new spaces all the time. What's the role of building that data set or maintaining it for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting. About a year ago, I've been with the company a year and a half now. The company itself is 4 years old, so in terms, I'm a veteran there. So we've experienced quite a bit of growing pains, and I would say our business model last year was focused on gaining properties, getting spaces as fast as we could. Today, we're focused on the clients. We're focused on first getting our clients understanding their programming, and then we'll fit them with the space. Yeah, we do have quite a bit of a portfolio of spaces. We kind of had that work backwards with current spaces that we do have and how we gain our clients. And so we have to use what we already have with properties and using design technology to bring in our clients with renderings, with virtual reality, with any visual communication assets out there that we currently have to really bring in the clients, understand the programming, and then sell the space. The space, it can be vacant for a year, for whatever reason, for surrounding neighborhood, maybe it's just the time of the year or the location, it could be for a number of reasons. So we really got to understand our clients first before we can sell the space, and that's really through spatial data, which has become even more important today. I would also say, on the back end of that, I do support the marketing team quite a bit, the sales team, the real estate team, and leveraging design technology. But on the back end, when we do have these spatial data with our property portfolio, we are a flexible company. Our clients do grow with us, and they move from one property to the next. So we need to understand and document what that actually looks like, where we can save money, since we understand the client already, what else do they want? And not just like in New York, we can have clients like Amazon, for example, in Germany, in other countries in the world, where we understand who they are, but maybe in Germany, it's something totally different. So we do have to understand more deeply, utilizing our spatial data, what exactly they need,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm actually curious. So we've been mentioning a number of different departments that are involved with the spatial data. Marketing is actually a big department that when I came out of school, I wasn't even aware how big of a role that architecture plays. We talked about VR, we talked about renderings. I'm curious if, anybody on the panel maybe wants to dive a little bit more into, the role of marketing and also the budgets that are there, that architects are able to kind of like tap into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marketing budgets are huge. That's how you get cash flow and bring in, the money for a startup, for a growing company, especially a company that wants to maybe get acquired or go to IPO. They look at the cash flow. So supporting marketing and helping the sales team sell a space, a property. You're working with clients and brokers who don't have a background, who don't understand the 3D world. So you really have to be creative and help them through the process. They can't necessarily look at 2D floor plans because they're not going to understand. We don't have the budget to stage an entire space, like a 40,000 square foot space. So what comes in is all the tools that we have here at IP or anywhere else, using VR, using all the things that are already out there. That really helps with the marketing team. And so then we start to cross-collaborate with that discipline, then you start entering the sales team, more on the demand side, I would call it, where eventually they'll start to look at you as a foundational, need-based personnel, but marketing is how you get your foot in the door, really, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question regarding when you accumulate data by doing photogrammetry. Is there a smart way to pair it with image recognition to start counting and creating databases, or do you still do it manually? Like, let's say dumbbells or equipment. Do you count them manually, or is there an image sampling process that happens hand in hand with the photogrammetry that would count it for you?
I'll leave it open if anybody wants to jump
Yeah, I
in.
mean, that ends up being a bit technical, and I honestly would ask you.
I'm just the moderator today. No,
I'm looking at this from the
Yeah.
operator's lens, and what gets me going is the data itself. There's obviously technical limitations. I mean, I can say just from what I know that there is no easy way. I think the most intensive recognition that's on the market now is obviously facial, and right now that isn't specific enough to get into each operator's individual needs. So Equinox obviously doesn't have a tech budget in order to develop recognition for dumbbells, to say it is.
One day.
Yeah, exactly, one day. But I think what's unique about, and I just want to touch on the marketing question because it is very important that everyone understands that marketing truly is what sells, and you're not wrong in saying that marketing has the biggest budget, because it always does on a CapEx at the end of the year. What's unique about being able
Can you
to
explain
use...
CapEx to everybody in the room? Because I'm not sure that that's a term you usually come across.
Basically, what I'm trying to describe is at the end of the year, you need to allocate budget, and marketing always has the biggest number. That's what I'm trying to say. But what's really unique about marketing is that in order to push spaces and make them feel exciting, and I think it's very unique to Knotel and to Equinox specifically, is we've designed very nice spaces. We're not in the budget market. That's obvious if you look at how much memberships to our operating locations cost. So marketing plays a really big role in that, and what we're finding is that there is a very unique role for not only spatial data but multimedia assets to in turn affect how marketing utilizes that budget. Obviously, still photography has been the medium forever, but what we're finding now is that in today's tech-savvy consumer market, there needs to be a switch because people are expecting a switch. And I've been in so many meetings with marketing teams where one of the biggest grimaces, or sales teams rather, is the fact that you can buy a Tesla and you feel comfortable buying a Tesla online. You don't even have to look at it, but people still struggle to sign up for Equinox online, and we're trying to figure out why, and it ends up coming down to the experience. And if you can further amplify that experience through digital means, either on a website or on an Instagram ad, that ends up becoming the impetus for people to sign up. And we're a user-based business. Like all of our, I shouldn't say all, again, trouble saying all, but a lot of our income comes from our members. So more members, more income, and being able to amplify your experience in a digital way is what everyone's talking about right now.
I would also just add on from like a public sector perspective, it's not so much profit driven, but when we're talking about really large scale infrastructure projects, I'm thinking about our coastal resiliency portfolio for the city in particular. For Eastside Coastal Resiliency, we're building a 2.5 mile long flood protection along the entire Lower East Side of Manhattan. And so obviously members of the community are very concerned about, you know, what will that look like in my neighborhood? And what can I expect in another Superstorm Sandy? Like, what will my neighborhood look like during a flood event? So we, for that project in particular, for our community engagement outreach, we're able to use 3D visualizations, but also animations of, okay, in a flood event, this is what it'll look like when the deployable gates close. And also, you know, with sea level rise, this is what it looks like today, but in 2050, this is what the water level will be along the Esplanade. So, you know, just from a perspective of getting residents of New York to understand, you know, what will your neighborhood look like, it's such a valuable tool.
You guys have a really strong visualization component, right, and GSAP. I'm curious to hear from a couple of you about like new kinds of visualizations that you're exploring or leveraging in your classes. If you guys are working on VR, I know there's like a Unreal rendering class I think that used to be around. Anybody really into, like, I know you said you're really into VR. Not to put you on the spot, but you know, we'll make this like a roundtable panel in some ways. Otherwise I'm gonna start picking on someone, so.
Yeah, last year I took a class of VR, actually, Unreal Engine in GSA, and it was interesting because each person had the option to choose from a very wide range of topics. Some were like extracting data from Twitter tweets, for, let's say Trump. Some were a bit more GIS-based extraction of data. So like our group in particular dealt with Lake NYC. So it also tied back to Sidewalk Labs and like the streetscape a bit more. And we were like literally mapping some of them and trying to see how VR can come to the street out of this equipment that's already very techy. Like it has a lot of power in it, and it kind of acts as a, let's say a lot of people are saying that it's like a hacker that knows everything about everyone when they sign up for Wi-Fi. So using this in a positive way to start acting with people who cross and giving them suggestions of advertisements that are linked to their profiles on Facebook. So it would be like an integrated system of how the Link NYC can give you something positive in front of you instead of doing it behind the box.
Was this with like goggles or was it to display on the street?
It was to display on the street.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, do you want to maybe talk about some of the visualizations that you're really interested in?
I don't know, because I use different engines usually. As I know, the architecture guys usually use V-Ray, right? Or real-time rendering, maybe Lumion, Unreal. But I use Neal 40 and Octane and Redshift, which is really different from usual, because so basic system, it has actually numbers. It's basically a mesh. And it works like 3D version of the pixels like Photoshop. So, which means it makes a rendering and visualization really, really fast. The fancy graphics. So, if only V-Ray, who is using only V-Ray, see my graphics, they start to ask me how I render this, because the basic understanding of the render engine works actually really different between Octane and V-Ray. So, yeah, that's how I started taking deep into the rendering engines, and I think recently, of course, the point cloud is actually really highly rated the density, the voxels. So also that is really highly has something to do with the renderings in Octane, especially on the particle stuff. So
you're coming at it from like a efficiency side as well, understanding like how you can produce quicker
Yes,
to do iterations.
since I'm not really super rich people and I cannot get supercomputer, it's really important to
If only.
it's really important to
We
manage
look at our
data.
TV.
Yeah.
It's the elephant in the room.
So, I mean, yeah, seriously, if I have supercomputer, I don't have too much worry about it. But since I have laptop, which is really thin, and I have to manage all the data I have individualized and really comprehensive graphics. So, yeah, converting into mesh, but efficiently making it with some pod mesh, I think. So, yeah, that is really important for me
Okay.
to take a visualization.
Yeah, I think, oh, go ahead.
No, I just building another class that we're doing that Violet is actually one of the professors is a class where you have the freedom to connect any data that you want from any space. It could be public, private, it can be people's behavior, it can be static objects, it can be really anything, and then kind of use Grasshopper to create either an image or an animation. And there's something in not just mapping, because anyone or probably everybody can map like things that they find, but how do you communicate it so clearly and so beautifully with a tool that is supposed to be so technical? Is an interesting twist on this course. And actually going back to the whole marketing thing, are we now all marketers? And are marketing people becoming obsolete at this point?
I actually, this is a good segue because we're also all here, like, interested in the role of the architect and the designer and what that means in the future. And I think this might be a good opportunity to kind of, what do you guys think is the future role of the architect or designer? I think traditionally it's been all about deliverables, right? We see the architect as making a blueprint, which is still something that I hear. And I'm not gonna get into it, but now it's you're outputting Revit models, drawings. You're seen as very much like production heavy, so that at the end of the day you get like a 2D thing that you hand to your clients. But I think we're all kind of trying to challenge that. And I'm curious to hear from the panel about how you think that role is changing. Are we now the harborers of spatial data? Are we the new marketers? What do you guys think? I guess we can start over here.
I think that you're seeing a lot of architects go on very different routes. So like I'm kind of living in this product world, more on the business side, and then a lot of architects are also, and a lot of architects are going a more entrepreneurial route, and others are going a little bit more deep into the tech. Maybe marketing is kind of on the, less on the tech and engineering side and more like using that on the entrepreneurship side. But I think what architects bring is, you probably hear this gospel a lot in school, but I think the kind of systems approach and systems design, and so being able to work with data and many different types of programs and build a holistic picture of how both like different programs and systems fit together, how processes work, both in space and time, like that has applications both for businesses, for entrepreneurship, but also for like communicating. To me, marketing is just a way of communicating the future, which is already what architects do. It's like, I'm going to tell you about how I think the world could be, or like some portion of the world could be. Anything from like a cost model to rendering is doing that. It's like speculating on what could be and trying to sell it or market it or like make a conviction around that. So I think what architects bring is that I think what's hard is that we get typecast into like an architect does this, and right now we're seeing a kind of similar threads and all these different dimensions of being like an entrepreneur or product-y or going into technology and simulation. Like they're similar threads but many different routes. You just have to like wear the title that fits in these different fields, but I think the common thread is that kind of systemic thinking and the ability to think about time and space and process.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely call myself more of a visual communicator in a sense that, so we have our traditional architecture where, you know, people are saying it's a dying profession. So how do we bring it back up? I mean, basically through technology and communicating all the data that we have that's just sitting there right now, and how do we leverage it up using metrics? How do we actually use it to sell, to make a profit, to make money? I mean, that's what people ultimately want. So in a sense, yes, we are marketers, but we'll call ourselves visual communicators, you know. Just a different way of making money. From an old way of building buildings and all the documents we've ever had. It's just dust right now, but we can leverage it to meet not only our benefits, but owners and other people out there, you know.
I mean, I think just coming at it from even an urban planner angle, the role of the planner has changed so much, I think, from like, you know, what we traditionally think of as just coming up with master plans and coming up with zoning schemes to really like working on more data intensive types of endeavors, including kind of like mapping equity, like what does that even mean? And I think, you know, coming up with those kind of creative ways to leverage data sets to kind of make sense of something as complex as a city or a neighborhood is obviously a challenge, but something that makes, I think, the planning profession very interesting and kind of giving planners more latitude to kind of extend out into something that may not be traditionally seen as planning.
Yeah, I mean, I would think these are all great points, and I would add that, I mean, hardly adding because you seem to have kind of touched on everything I wanted to say, but yeah, spatial thinking is something that's very unique to the architectural profession, and I don't think that's going anywhere. Being able to sit in a room with people that are not architects or designers and explain complex ideas spatially, because some people just think and learn and are trained differently. That's something that won't go away no matter what the tools we design or people design that we use are. You know, 10 years from now, we will still all be communicators. And I think that that's one thing that everyone should learn before they leave architectural college or education, is that at the end of the day, we're all salespeople. And it's funny to say, but everyone, I mean, architects, developers, everyone in the industry, we're salespeople. And you learn that very early on when you join the industry, because at the end of the day, you are pitching and you're trying to push ideas on other people. You know, the architecture industry is service-based, and being able to express your ideas very, very clearly is one of those most important things that I don't think that technology can change. And I think one of the most interesting anecdotes that I learned very early on, I worked at KPF before I was at Equinox, and every time they would be pitching either a concept or some sort of design to a developer, they would always use the same format. It was very funny, and it stuck to me because it was always linear, and they would present, you know, 5 or 6 options. They would always do the one they really, really wanted to get pushed forward in the middle. They would put one that was absolutely ludicrous on one side, and then one that was so boring that it hurt on the other side. And they would present it in a way that the developer or the landlord, whoever they were pushing to, would always end up picking the middle because it was a common balance. And to me, that's sales. That's an experience in sales. So learn that very early on. I think it's a very interesting technique. I shouldn't go out and use that, but there are other ways to do it, and I think that it's a very important thing to learn. It's communication and being a good salesperson at the end of the day.
I think we're touching on a really interesting
Chantal,
point.
thanks,
Yeah.
Chantal.
Oh yeah, please.
So I guess to what extent are the neighborhood level companies collecting or even modeling information about how their intervention is changing neighborhoods? And is that in itself a marketing thing that, oh, if I put a Whole Foods here, the neighborhood changes in like these ways and like these demographics get affected and things like that?
I'm trying to remember the Topos.ai is one of these companies that's focused on things like, they focus on market research, and basically like certain companies like Starbucks or where there are major chains, they do a lot of market research on what neighborhood makes sense for me to jump into based on my previous analytics or whatnot. And so I know that's a whole kind of domain. It's not actually something we do much of, but I think it is a growing sector. But remind me your whole question.
I guess because everything seems to be about like this is what the neighborhood is or this is what it was, but I'm not sure if there's like a future component to like this is what is likely to happen once it's like introduced.
Well, I think, yeah, that's interesting, like a forecasting. I mean, a lot of
Analytics, maybe?
we do a little forecasting around like what we think will happen in terms of climate, or if a new development comes in, what that might do. I think the difficult thing is predictions are usually, if you're using data, it uses historic data, so it's a linear projection, which is not really how the world always works. You model historic data, and then you just replicate like all the biases of the past, and like think things will continue in whatever trajectory is happening now.
I know there's a company in the Bay Area called Streetlight Data that focuses solely on your question. They explore the history and present time of like, say, a grocery store in one neighborhood, and why certain workforce may go to a different grocery store and not that one. And so the city, they work with the city of San Francisco and the city of Oakland to kind of plan future grocery stores or Equinoxes or whatever there may be, a need for, and try to fill that need for future planning, I know with my company, we actually have a platform called Neighborhood. It's a little bit on the opposite end of your question, where we highlight with our clients, we sell it as a package, as a service, that this neighborhood would have these restaurants, or transportation is very important. How close are you from work to the closest subway station, or anything else that a client might need. And we try to package it all in one as a selling point in order to bring in more clients,
I mean, I guess thinking at a more kind of macro scale, one of the hot topics obviously has been affordable housing in the city of New York, and so a means to producing more affordable housing has been to rezone large neighborhoods throughout the city. So I previously was at the Department of City Planning, and part of what we were grappling with, we're obviously dealing with, okay, what are the impacts of doing this rezoning in this neighborhood, and what will be the long-term socioeconomic impacts of that? Is it a direct one-to-one, okay, if you rezone, it'll become gentrified, right? But again, kind of to Violet's point, it's you're using historical data sets, and especially with people's migration patterns being so uncertain, it's very hard to predict what's going to happen. And 20 years, 30 years ago, nobody thought that New York City would be growing at the pace that it is now. So it's hard to kind of at a macro scale see what is the future state going to be like for this particular neighborhood, for example.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the importance of the architect as a marketer or visual communicator. Is it always to the same audience, or since we're getting closer to communicating with clients, are we at the same time getting further in communicating with contractors and engineers? Because they usually use a more traditional approach with more flat drawings, let's say, and they need more technical information rather than spatial data. Is it something that would create more disparity in the architecture profession, where some people would focus more on the spatial and some would stay on the technical, or is it, how do you see it developing?
I mean, you're not wrong in what you're saying. There's certainly, from what I've seen, a disparity between visual and then what really builds buildings, which is, the construction process based around 2D drawing sets. And what I think that there will be a point in time that we'll all be able to witness when those two get closer and closer to each other. But what I'm noticing now is that there is kind of a leaning trend where even within large architectural offices, you have those that are doing primarily work through through spatial data visualization, and then you have those that are very fluid and proficient with technical data. And I think that there is going to be a point, and that point will be further subsidized by technology. And it's only through technology that we'll be able to really combine those two. And I think BIM is a great first step to that, but there's got to be more. And I think AR and VR is going to be huge in the next decade in order to further facilitate that. Because, you know, you look around and everything feels so advanced in other industries. And being, as an academic, everything feels so advanced in architecture as well. But unfortunately, the real state of things is that in the workforce, there are some old school techniques that are utilized. And that isn't changing much. And unfortunately, all of what we're doing visually, spatially, through BIM, etc., ends up getting flattened, for lack of a better term, into the way that the construction industry operates. I'm optimistic about the future, and I think it will rely on technology in order to bridge that gap further.
And I think architects moving into different companies and getting comfortable in a role that's not an architect, like maybe by title, is actually one of the things that can help us get there faster. Because I think when I look around at like what's made a lot of the big jumps and shifts, a lot of it is people working with the city, working with a company, or working. I'm like obsessed with Seamless for some reason, but I feel like even working for Seamless, they're working with spatial logistic data. Like, an architect should absolutely be working there. So I like hate this, we keep ourselves in this box of like, I need to go work in a firm. It's like, if you look around at who's changing the state of these things, it's a lot of tech companies. And I think that architects should be having a say in where all of this technology is going and bringing their expertise there, you know.
So I have a question. So things are moving really quickly, as you say, but that's also because in terms of policy, the US has been really weak with regulating all of this, unlike the EU, which has strong regulations on data. And California just passed an act, I don't know what it's called, but it's really strong about what data you can collect. And that's going to slow down everything. And do you think that's going to affect all of your professions, all of your things? 'Cause
I actually don't think that it will really slow innovation too much, because I think the regulation on data is something that I think we should welcome. Like, that's a good thing. That doesn't mean that we won't use data, you know, like a phone book is data. It's a bunch of information about where things are. It's spatial data, you know, it's where things are, like an address book with a number code and a blah, blah, blah. It's just, now we've digitized that and it's on a map. So I think it's good that we regulate these things and we have ways of doing that, but I don't think that's going to get rid of the technology or like from existing with those rules.
Yeah, I personally don't think so either, because a lot of regulations around data, most people are welcoming, because there's an alarming rate at which data is being collected every day. But what's unique about the regulations, that's typically around the realm of public data. And from what I've seen, public data is generally used for speculative purposes, like for, you know, defining broad goals, ambitions, for doing things like mapping demographics, which is all useful. But I think the biggest use of data is actually in the private sector and is happening in-house. So companies are leveraging data that's not being collected, you know, illegally based on the regulations that are being passed, in order to do really great things within their organizations. Like, for example, to bring the anecdote back to Equinox, by collecting data internally, that's all privatized data that would never be public, and we're utilizing it we're leveraging it to make better decisions. So I think that's going to happen across the board, and as less and less public data is available, there will be more collection and organization around the usefulness of privatized data.
I'm actually curious to hear from you a little bit. New York City has this really great open data platform. How much does your department interface with that? And are there data sets that you think are really kind of lacking? Because I know, you know, and it is de-identified, right? So there is probably a line that is maintained in terms of like protecting privacy and sensitivity and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the entire city of New York and all of the data sets that we publish. I would say like the closest thing to something that might be personally identifiable is like 311 calls, right? So we just remove who submitted the call. But I mean, for my agency in particular, I think, you know, we report out on the status of our capital projects, but there's definitely a lot more that I feel that we can be doing to be more transparent around like what are the actual delays on our projects, what are cost overruns, because we should ultimately be accountable to the people of New York City. Part of it is also just not having really great data systems, you know, so I think over time we're getting there, and there was recently a city council bill passed, so we'll have to comply. But you know, I'm like one of those people that secretly are happy about it, you know, at my agency. But you know, that I think that only through legislation you really like push the public sector to improve the quality of what they're doing.
Makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious. So we've talked about us having to be salespeople. We've talked about, you know, money and capital are a big part of the job. If money was not an object, if you know you had as many tech people at your disposal as you could, what would you guys do with that for your organizations? Like, what's the dream? Where are we trying to get to?
World peace.
Yeah, I have to say world peace.
I would say that the big goal is developing a true digital portfolio, and one that evolves and grows as we continue to evolve as a company, for many reasons. Obviously, the development department and operations and real estate and everything that fits within that can utilize that kind of data every single day. You know, even just being able to offset the price of a plane by going into a virtual model or going to a 360 walkthrough to be able to see things, not necessarily in real time. I think that could be the future, but a snapshot of what something was, but also leveraging that on the marketing side, because what I've learned is that marketing really is one of the most important things in every industry, especially those that are kind of public facing. So being able to leverage data and using this unprescribed amount of capital that you're giving me to basically arm our sales teams and our marketing teams with as much relevant data, information, and multimedia that they could.
I would say not only that for our real estate and sales team and marketing team, but another end of that, operations and maintenance and facilities teams, where we can have live maps and 3D models for fire or life safety, you know, just in case something's happening, and they can locate exactly and pinpoint where that's happening. If a member needs furniture or needs something, some maintenance happening, we can locate that, pinpoint, and service them as quickly as possible. Just on the, you know, the member and client side, once they move into a space, just to make their lives more convenient, you know.
I think for us, it's really, we have this long ambition to democratize the planning process and design process. So if you look at all across the world, how buildings and master developments take place, most places are not formally planned and don't have access to how do I lay out a building structurally and make sure that there's not going to be any problems, to lay infrastructure in a way that's going to work for a district. Like, that expertise is like siloed, and it becomes even more difficult when it's not mandated or regulated, but also like it's cost prohibitive to do. So I think being able to democratize all of that process so that like if someone builds a simulation over here that across the world is useful to someone else, the other person over there shouldn't have to rebuild that. Like being able to actually exchange those tools is what I would want to get to.
I mean, I'm thinking of like a specific example where, you know, right now our agency and the Department of Transportation are charged with making every single corner ADA accessible. So making sure that pedestrian ramps are installed at every single intersection. So, you know, right now we're in the process of scanning every single sidewalk to see, okay, what are the elevations, and are these actually meeting ADA standards? But then the next step is we in DOT and private developers and Con Edison will be reconstructing these ped ramps to make them compliant, but maintaining that giant data set. Like, you know, I can't even imagine how that's all gonna work in like a very seamless way. And it seems like we would probably need more people to do that. You know what I mean?
So you're essentially creating like a giant, you said scanning, like point cloud
Yes.
data, so you're creating like a giant model of all
Every corner.
sidewalks of New York City.
Yes.
That's
But you know, you can imagine a world where, you know, over the next 10, 15, 20 years, we'll be reconstructing all of these corners. But for somebody who has accessibility needs to just plan their route that they're gonna take, they would be able to know which corners that are accessible. Like, that would be amazing.
Yeah, well, there you have it. We have some pretty lofty goals from digital portfolios to exchanging, you know, tools around the world to emergency response systems to mapping the entirety of New York City at point cloud level. We certainly have our work cut out for us. So I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I'm sure you're going to have some questions, maybe they're specific to some of our panelists, so I want to allow everybody to kind of like remingle, maybe freshen up your drink, actually enjoy that food. Thank you to our panelists who have made my job incredibly easy and practically year-end itself. So yeah, thanks again for coming.